Hi, Gwilym. It seems like an age since we've sat down and done one of these. It's probably only a couple of weeks, but I think we've been busy doing lots of interesting things.
I've forgotten how to do it.
Oh no, that's a bit of a disaster then, because I've never known how to do it.
It's going to go really, really well. No, you did the intro really well. Did the listeners know about the 3-2-1 mark?
No, I don't think they do. No, thank you for saying that.
The mysteries of the technical complexity of what we do day in, day out when we're podcasting. I don't think we've shared it fully. More importantly, we haven't shared the joy and excitement on your face when you get to tell the guests about doing 3-2-1 mark.
3-2-1 mark. Yeah.
Oh, it's just, they know they're in safe hands when they see that.
I always thought it was quite a well-known thing that people just did this, but everyone always seems to be quite surprised by it. So we ought to signal the exciting podcasts just around the corner. Not that this one isn't going to be a really, really exciting podcast. It will.
This is a banger.
We've got something special lined up, haven't we? We're going to a pub again.
Yeah, we are.
We're going to record 3 podcasts in a pub with a bit of an audience.
I think we're also, we haven't got confirmation from the person who's doing this, and he doesn't know we think he's doing this. We're also going to have a jingle, a release of our new jingle.
Yeah.
But we have to actually ask him first. It's on the podcast now, so he's going to have to do it.
Yes. So one of the podcasts is about music and IP, and our guest is going to create something for us, isn't he? That's really
maybe.
I don't know whether you've noticed, and again, I don't know which order they're going out in, but I did sequence the podcast on that day. So the most serious one was first. The kind of enjoyable but still semi-serious one was second. And then the third one, it really doesn't matter whether we get it right or get it wrong or ever release it. Because I was thinking that's probably where we're going to be in the kind of the alcohol stakes by that time.
No one will be able to tell the difference.
Lee Davis and Gwilym Roberts are the 2 IPs in a pod, and you are listening to a podcast on intellectual property, brought to you by the Chartered Institute of Patent Attorneys.
Anyway, we probably ought to crack on with this one, shouldn't we? Because we can see our guest, we can see he's sitting there laughing politely at what he thinks are the right moments. So we ought to get him on. It's John Noble from British Brands Group. John, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
I always ask our guests to introduce themselves because it seems otherwise it means I've got to do research and things like that, and I really don't have the time. So
you've done a pretty good job.
Of course, I've done a bit of research, but tell us all about yourself.
Well, no, I run the British Brands Group. It's a not-for-profit member organisation, and the members are branded companies with a heavy bias towards fast-moving consumer goods. And I have been doing this work since the 90s, so a long time.
Yeah, that's a fair old gig, isn't it? How many members have you got?
We're up to close to 50 full members now, and we've got about 10 associate members, which we get tremendous value from them. Many of them sort of law firms, IP specialists and the like. And we've got, I'm just trying to think how many. I think we've got 6 or 7 brand entrepreneur members. Now those members we give, or the council gives free membership to, if they've got a turnover under £1 million. And so really just so we say, starting off on their journey, and so the group gives them free membership.
So your background is in marketing. You're a marketeer, aren't you?
That's right.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about your kind of career before British Brands?
Yeah. Well, I mean, my very first job post-university was on the British Airways training scheme, the sort of graduate training scheme, and that gave me insights into various aspects of that business. And it was the marketing aspects which resonated the strongest for me. So that sent me off on the marketing path. And then I moved into marketing consultancy, doing some FMCG work, but also interestingly some work for government too. So that's where the sort of the marketing and the government work sort of collided, as it were. And then I moved from there into service marketing. It was just at a time when, the big estate agency firms were being created. So this was in the late 80s, and I joined Hamptons to run their, be involved in their marketing team. And that was fascinating from a branding point of view, because that was a disparate group of essentially standalone businesses, partnerships, which were all brought together. And of course, marketers don't like that. Marketers like consistency and coherence and all of that. And and if you know anything about partners, they're very strong, self-identities, strong egos, very clear, often different ideas about the directions of things. So it was a fabulous few years I worked with them, and then joined the British Brands Group after that.
I'm forever being moaned at for not using quite the right SEPA logo, or not quite getting the corporate font right. I'm sure Gwilym's not like that at K&S. You must have a really tight marketing strategy, mustn't you, Gwilym?
But there's two options. There's either a beautifully packaged, perfectly branded one, or if I do it myself, it's just blue with white writing on, which sends them absolutely round the bend on my PowerPoints.
John, was marketing still a dirty word back then, or had it started to become cleaner? Because I always remember sort of in the 80s, marketing was always dark arts. And it's...
No, I didn't. I never sensed that. No, I never sensed that. Actually, I'm delighted to say I might have otherwise rethought my career. But no, certainly, with when working for Hamptons, marketing was seen to be the glue that was going to, bring everything together and offer a, sort of a very clear point of difference, proposition, whatever you like to call it, out to the people we were trying to serve. So no, it was seen as fundamental to that, and very different from what I'd call the hard commercial sales side of the business. Yeah.
Sorry, maybe that's the bit I'm thinking about.
I'm not unfamiliar with the world of partners, and yes, it is a world of it's a world of successful people who've done very well doing what they do. This has nothing to do with podcast now, Lee. Sorry, I'm really interested in the Hamptons thing. It must be more about diplomacy and politics than anything, that whole story, I would have thought. I mean, presumably the business proposition was pretty strong, but even so, getting people along must have been quite a challenge.
Yeah, and you could do a certain amount through sort of persuasion, cajoling, and arguing, but you actually had to try and find a few who were really willing to go with you, and then the results really spoke for themselves. So and then there would be a bit more of a groundswell behind you after that. So that tended to be the way that things went.
And then back to the podcast, Lee. Sorry.
Yeah, cheers, mate. I was going to get us back on track without you having to say that, but well done for ruining my little sort of seamless segue.
Here we go.
And then British Brands came about. So what was the story there? How did it happen?
Well, it was a lot of luck, to be honest. That I was looking for a job at that stage. I had committed what I had thought was career suicide by taking a year out of my career to drive with my wife a Harley Davidson across America for 9 months. We did it, 25,000 miles on two Harleys, and I thought, well, I'm never going to be employable after this. And so I was looking around for a job, and I was introduced to the British Brands Group because it was newly formed in those days. It was just after the Trademarks Act, so came law, so that was 94. And so I was introduced, and it just very fortuitously, my predecessor was then headhunted to go and work in Washington DC. So suddenly there was an opportunity, and it was just, the timing really couldn't have been better. So really fortunate.
And so what were the aims and objectives then, and what are they now? Have they changed? Has the British Brands been on a bit of a journey itself?
Not really too much, no. I mean, when the group was formed, it was very much a lobbying group to try and influence the trademarks bill, to try and for there to be stronger remedies against what we call parasitic copying, lookalike packaging, whatever you want to call it, but we call it parasitic packaging. And so there was the brand owners. It was when that particular problem was rife. You may remember Sainsbury's Classic Cola, I think, which was one of the high-profile ones. But actually, all the supermarkets were full of them, and brand owners were concerned and wanted stronger remedies and stronger tools to be able to sort of keep that kind of copying at bay. So that was very much the early mission, but it's very difficult to influence government policy if you're create a group and you're then lobbying and on a live bill with no essentially argumentation or research or any evidence behind you. So I came in initially, I found out as a consultant, saying what do you want to do with this group? Now that the trademarks bill is now an act, do you now disband it, or is there a role for a brand voice in the UK, like there is in many other European countries? And the members said unanimously, we want a brand voice. And the mission, is for the UK to, I mean, I'm paraphrased, but essentially the mission is, is for the UK to be a great place to create and build brands, and that, so that's good for consumers, good for shoppers. It's all about innovation. It's all about vigorous competition. So the mission has been unchanged for decades.
There's
Yeah,
loads. Oh, go on.
So we have a health. I mean, we have a really healthy trademark system, I'd say here, and also well understood. I mean, there's always. I'm sure we've talked about Colin, the Caterpillar, and all that kind of thing on previous podcasts. But it's the press is starting to get trademarks distinguished from patents and copyright, which is exciting. I know that's not your job to educate on IP, but the awareness is up there. I mean, would you say you can point to what big successes can you point to? Because there seems to be quite a lot of healthy kind of attitude towards trademarks.
Well, to be honest, I don't think it's anything that we are doing for more's the pity. I just think you just have to look at Dragon's Den, actually, and that's that's where I think the penny drops. Yeah, but having said that, you still see when these cases are reported, there's always a mix up between was that trademark, was that copyright, or was that design? It's there is a certain journalistic confusion that still goes on. I think, but so we're not there totally yet, I would say.
Yeah, not sure we also entirely get Dragon's Den when it comes to patents. I think sometimes they muddy the waters more than they provide any clarity. I sit there, watch it, and my head sinks into my hands sometimes. There was lots in what you said about the kind of the mission and the aims that would be good to unpack. But I know when we talked about the podcast about you coming on, the parasitic packaging one was something that you thought would be a useful thing to focus on. I'd never heard it called that. The moment I saw the phrase, I understood it immediately. It made absolute sense. So I mean, you've touched on one, the kind of cola mimicking. Is that the right word?
Yeah.
What other examples have you got? What work are you doing currently around it?
Oh, well, I mean, there are plenty of examples, and I think we've seen the high profile one, which went all the way was Penguin Puffin, of course. More recent ones, Saucy Fish, successful under trademarks, Moroccan Oil, Miracle Oil, which failed under passing off. And you've seen smaller companies more recently being copied and choosing not to go to court, but shall we say to go to the court of public opinion. And you see Hex sausages that go down that route. The collective yogurt has gone down that route successfully. So there are lots of examples, and you just have to walk into a few stores and you can see the examples there live today. And
what can the group do to help its members and others?
Yeah, well, I mean, essentially, from that point of view, our mission hasn't changed since 1994. What the members want are effective tools to, A, safeguard their reputation, but more importantly, prevent, shoppers being duped, manipulated, and deceived. I mean, that's the bottom line of, what we're trying to do. So, give the tools for brand owners to help themselves and to help shoppers at the same time. And the reason why I think, the parasitic copying is an interesting area, and the words, by the way, come from, and it's quite telling, the words come from continental unfair competition law. So, parasitic activity. So that's where the source of it all came from. Continental Europe, quite effective unfair competition rules. This doesn't seem to be quite such an issue. There may be other reasons for brand owners not to take action against these copies, if it's a major retail customer, for example. But that will be their choice, but they have the tools. In the UK, we don't have the effective tools, and we think they should have for, as I said, not just for themselves, but for shoppers as well. Uh-huh. And in terms of what we're doing on that, we've had lots of research, lots of evidence, so we all know that, people buy the wrong products, people make mistaken assumptions about the product, that their decision-making is manipulated and changed as a result of the packaging. That is all really robustly evidenced now over decades. So that work's been done. There's been government research led by the IPO, and that confirms those findings as well. We've had a government consultation on enforcement of the consumer protection regulations. So we've had that under a belt. And then Brexit, of course, came along, and we were, essentially in short, told by officials, please don't lobby us on parasitic copying while we're trying to exit the EU. So we didn't. And then the sort of latest, bit is that, well, there's been a recent consultation on consumer policy. So we put in a recommendation and a submission on that, but don't seem to be making any traction. So, it's frustrating that, now that we're coming back, with saying this is unfinished business, this is an area where the UK is not performing well, and it's not performing well both for citizens and for companies who want to build their reputations. But actually, there doesn't seem to be any desire to do something. And what is interesting too is that, we always look for evidence as it comes, and there's been a recent case, Hendrick's Gin against Hampstead Gin. Yeah. And there, we've always maintained that if you make a product look familiar, when it's not familiar, but when you make a product look familiar, you will certainly sell more of it. And I think that there's the evidence of that. But actually, that Hendrick's Gin case shows, and you can charge more. So, the Hendrick's Gin case was, about 15% increase in price as it moved from a distinctive pack to a copy pack.
Wow. Really?
So it had, so you'd think, then that might play quite usefully to the current policy agenda, the cost of, living crisis and all the rest of it. These products of copy are pricing higher than they would otherwise be able to do, because it's essentially they're a totally unknown product. They've got no reputation. They're essentially taking the reputation, and they're taking the trust which has been earned by the brand, and they're just stealing that and put it on their own products. So and there you go.
I know Gwilym is
commercial result for the copier.
I know Gwilym is absolutely desperate to come in because I'm psychic. I'm psychic when it comes to these things. So I'm going to offer him a hook and let me see if he can spot it. So so it's what I find quite fascinating about how brands respond to this copying is, there are probably a range of strategies, aren't there? But at one end, you've got, we're going to litigate. We're going to go for it. We're going to use whatever tools are at our disposal to deal with this through the legal system. And at the other end, hook coming, Gwilym, you have things that can start off as a bit of a social media spat. I'm thinking about the Brewdog. I can't remember whether it was Lidl or Aldi, but it was one of the two, where what started was a bit of a rant on Twitter about supermarket selling alcohol. The packaging looks a little bit like Brewdog, quite a bit like, and it ends with a partnership. So that went nowhere near litigation. It meant, well, let us make some kind of specials for you, and you can kind of sell it and so on. So there's that kind of quite interesting sort of range of approaches. Gwilym, over to you, mate.
No, I think let's start with that. So what does the British Brands Group think about that way of solving problems?
I think, as you say, there are many ways of solving problems. So, I think, yes, if you are IP savvy, you'll have got your trademark registrations. You'll know what unregistered rights you have very clearly. Copyright plays a part in all of this. You'll have got your design sorted out. And so actually, probably nowadays you'll have your IP pretty well ring fencing your packaging. At least you hope you do. There may still be instances where it floats through, but so that for the IP savvy people who've got that resource and that knowledge and who are prepared to make that investment up front, that is a solution. We don't think it's a great solution, but it's the best around in the UK at present. Then you've got those companies who, and maybe this may be not the case, but my sense is that they may not have the robust IP protection that they would ideally like, but they feel deeply hurt, that this is unjust, unfair, and that they must do something. And so in the absence of an IP solution and in the absence of any other kind of solution, they go to the court of public opinion. So that's another option. To be honest, the Brewdog issue, and this is very much a personal view, not a British Brands Group's view, I just think that smacked to me of synchronized swimming. I just felt the whole thing just happened too smoothly, too fast, to be genuine. And all my suspicious radars were tingling at that one. But who knows?
Well, respect to both of them because they played a blinder. But so that's really interesting. So I mean, people passing each other off. Passing off is what you turn to when you don't have your registered rights, of course. That's an old law. The issues have been well rehearsed over decades and decades, as you say. But your feeling is that there's still not enough in what's missing?
The trouble is on the enforcement side is how difficult it is to demonstrate to a court satisfaction that consumers have been confused, misled, or whatever. And I think that takes a number of different forms. We're talking about fast-moving consumer goods here. We're talking about regular purchases. They tend to be low-price purchases. So are you going to get? You can't do the research in store because the copier won't allow you to do that. So how do you find the people who have been misled? Certainly social media has some advantages, but also it can act the other way because, social media, they're very clear in saying, well, actually, these aren't the same products. But for me, that doesn't actually get to the core of the problem. The core of the problem is the way that we as individuals, as shoppers, make decisions in store. If you're going into a store with 20,000 choices in front of you as you walk in the door, how are you going to get around that? And the way you get around that is using what some of us will understand as being fast thinking, system one thinking. We're using heuristics, we're using cues, we're using shortcuts. And so we recognize products particularly by pack shape, pack color, perhaps font shape, but certainly not the actual words. So you can have a product that actually has, quite different words on it, but if the pack color, the pack shape is the same, then certainly you might pick up the wrong product, but, IP would cover that. But I think much more egregious is that actually what you're making a product look familiar. So you're triggering, the copy is triggering the heuristics that people associate with the brand. So the shopper thinks, I recognize that, that's a familiar product. And that is all subconscious. So if a product is looking familiar and feels familiar to you, you can't override that subconscious feeling by rational analysis, by saying, well, actually, no, this is a completely different product. I know nothing about this product at all. It has no reputation for me at all. That's just not how we are wired as individuals. So, and it's that familiarity that will encourage the purchase, encourage you to pay more than would otherwise be the case, or should we say encourage the retailer to charge more than would otherwise be the case. And that's where the manipulation lies. And passing off doesn't really deal with that. Now, we feel the solution to this actually doesn't lie necessarily in IP, but in consumer protection regulations. And that still, talks about, misleading consumers and, making the average consumer not making, choices that they would otherwise make, distorting shopper behavior. So the test isn't hugely different, but it is different enough, we think, to be influential in finding a solution to this. And I also think, too, that it would have a negotiating power for the brand owner. So the brand owner goes into a copier and says, you've infringed my IP rights, well, actually, the evidence, except for a few instances, not very convincing that those are going to help you. And so you get laughed out of the room. You've got your negotiating position is actually very, very weak. But if you say, well, if you're infringing my IP rights and we feel that you are misleading and duping your shoppers, and so we're bringing an action under consumer protection regulations as well, I think that's a far more painful accusation to aim at a retailer. And would give them much more pause for thought and perhaps hold them back a little bit more from going wild on social media. And you get a negotiated settlement. That's what we all want. Nobody wants to go to the court to test these things. But actually, bizarrely, and, because we argued strongly for this in 2008, we said to government, give brand owners the rights of action under the CPRs in this narrow area of parasitic packaging. And, we feel that will be job done. They decided not to, for whatever reasons they decided not to. 18 European countries do allow brand owners to take action under consumer protection laws. So it's not as if there's any unforeseen consequences or any horrors by going down that route. But, at the moment, only trading standards can enforce. And quite frankly, trading standards have got more important things to enforce, actually. And we recognize that. So why not allow brand owners to do it? But for some reason, government's very reluctant. Less cost to the consumer. Less cost to the public purse, less duty on trading standards. Do you think that all be good public policy? But no, not at the moment, it seems.
So basically the kind of the shape of the legislation is available, the precedents are out there in Europe, and I can see why that was a sensitive topic over the last few years now. I get it. But I suppose the counter argument is, does that give too much power to the brand? I know what you're going to say, obviously. Does it potentially give too much power to the brand owner or to the big players? Might that be a counter argument that you hear?
No, it doesn't give any power to the brand owners, because the CPRs is a consumer test. If you are misleading consumers and you're influencing the buying decisions of shoppers, that is a consumer test, and that's what everything is based on. It's not a question of the power of the person who may be bringing the action. So absolutely, there's no influence on the market dynamics. And it'd be worth also just saying that what we're looking for are the products to be repackaged distinctively so they don't mislead. We're not suggesting the product should go off the market. So there's no question here of suggesting that competition should in any way be diluted, because we want these products out of the way. The products, we have no issue with the products. It's just the way that they are packaged to dupe shoppers. And so what we're seeking is vigorous competition, which is where I started, but fair competition. Yeah, and people aren't misled into buying things they didn't intend to buy, or under mistaken assumptions about their familiarity, trust, qualities, whatever.
I know Gwilym wants to crack on with this because it's clearly got his teeth there, but I just wanted to chuck something in because I'm reminded of a little local case. I say little local case. It did involve a kind of a big global company. So it was to do with the branding of a steakhouse in Portsmouth. The name of the steakhouse was Relentless, and the guy had, in his kind of back bedroom, created all of his own kind of marketing material, the graphics for outside the shop and so on, and had just picked a random old font and didn't think anything of it. And that random old font, when you look at the rendering of it, just happens to be very similar to a soft drink that shared that brand name. And I remember, so I've just been doing a little bit of Googling back to remind myself of it. And so it started with him getting a 17-page cease and desist instruction from the big international brand, and it ended within a few weeks with them paying for his rebranding, because it was simpler and easier to say it's going to cost a couple of grand for you to rebrand. Let's just pay it for you. And that's kind of getting it right, isn't it? That's the saying, we're trying to look after our brand here. We recognise that what you're trying to do as well. Let's happy out of it.
No, and I think that sounds, very, very reasonable. Yes. So I mean, we've had examples of this ourselves too, where people have been trading as the British Brands Group, and you come to a amicable solution. You don't have to get too heavy, and common sense rules, and that's great. But I think common sense rules only if both parties come to the table with a willingness to compromise and reach that sensible agreement, and that's the balance that we think is lacking at the moment. But and that's what needs attention.
Back to you, Gwilym.
So ages ago, I think you mentioned system one thinking, which might be a reference to thinking fast and slow.
That's right. Possibly. Yes, it is. System one is fast thinking. Yeah,
which I haven't read. I've read bits of it, but I did glance at it because our non-executive director said I should. Thank you, Jeremy. But it was. I mean, it's really. I mean, I don't know if you come across it, Lee. It's about how many decisions you think are being made using your kind of careful, rational processes, but actually it's based on your immediate reactions, hence buying something that looks like a penguin bar. You're in a bit of a, there was a legal test, wasn't it? The moral in a hurry. I think they called it at one point. So we've all been there.
I hate that saying. I think it's just so, I think it's disrespectful for a start. It is, but also too, I just think it just is a laziness in not understanding how shoppers behave, and it absolutely plays to this system one thinking. And actually, you don't need to read the book. There's a really good 5-minute YouTube on thinking fast and slow, how the brain works, and it is very insightful. And I don't know whether you've ever done that, but if you're approaching a swing door and it's got a handle that comes towards you and a sign above it which says push, that you will pull that door. And the reason you do that is because the handle coming towards you sends you a signal to the brain. I am familiar with this. I know how this works. I pull handles that come towards me. And so that's what you do, irrespective of the fact that there's a 4-letter word above it, which actually gives you the accurate instruction. You ignore that. You're actually totally blind to it.
Yeah. And yet you don't like the phrase more than a hurry. No, so I retract that phrase. It's not mine. I think it was used popularly for a while.
No, I wasn't personal at all. No, I've lived with it in my career with the British Brands Group. So no, there's nothing personal in my comment at all.
but it does. I mean, there's a science sitting behind this, because if people, there must be. Again, it fascinates me, sitting there thinking, what bird's a bit like a penguin, that people are going to think, oh, that's like a penguin. Because I actually wouldn't have thought of puffin. I don't know about you. Lee, what bird do you think? I mean, if you're thinking penguins, what would you go for?
I spend a huge amount of time up in the wilds of sort of Aberdeen, as you know, and we often go puffin spotting. So I'd have thought puffin.
You would have thought puffin. I would have gone magpie, just because it's black and white. That's not useful. That's why I don't do this. That's why I'm patent attorney. But I mean, there must be a real science behind how close you can get, and yeah, I remember watching it, thinking, you know, some of the efforts going on there are actually really, there's so much creativity going into it. Why don't you just go make up something new instead? It's weird, isn't it?
No, that's right. And actually, that was one of the really bizarre things that came out of the government consultation on when it was looking to see should brand owners be given private rights of action, civil rights of action under the CPRs. And they're saying, oh, well, you know, there might be a detrimental effect of innovation if we do that. And you think, what? You know, so, you know, the brand owners are the innovators, the copiers are copiers, you know, they're not innovating by copying. And so actually, wouldn't it be better environment and climate for innovation if people do have to plow their own furrow, do have to be distinctive, because then they will think of the creative ways of doing that actually brings meaning to people's lives and makes people's lives better through their better products that they're able to offer. That's what you think a good market should operate like. Sorry, bit of a rant.
It's good.
John, when you said that we should make parasitic packaging the focus of the podcast, I thought, yeah, we'll do that in 5 minutes. We've been on it for 25 minutes. So can I just shift us a wee bit? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Gwilym and I, indeed, kind of lots of colleagues at SEPA, have been almost entirely focused for the last year plus on the UK's international trade aspirations. I won't go into the minutiae of the things that we're dealing with, but do British brands have a particular kind of interest in where the UK is going globally, thinking about its, not just its bilateral aspirations, but also its drive to get into things like the CPTPP?
I mean, as a group, we don't have any particular, you know, sort of export policy or trade policy that we're lobbying for. I mean, what is really important for us is that, you know, brands wherever they operate, you know, can build their reputations. Those reputations can be protected. They have, you know, the freedoms and the incentives to innovate for better, more competitive solutions, lower prices. That's, you know, that's all very much part of what they're looking for. And you know, and that, you know, where there are IP rights, they are enforceable and, you know, have some impact on market behavior. So, you know, those are the sort of the mantras that we look out for. And we're really, really fortunate in that a colleague of mine, Dawn Franklin from Brandright, who was actually a founder of the group when she was with Mars, participates in all those Department of International Trade discussions where they're, you know, reaching out to industry.
Yeah.
So it's very much from our point of view, you know, a watching brief, seeing what's done and making sure that, you know, what agreements are reached meet that requirement of, you know, good outcomes for innovation, for vigorous competition, reputation, IP, you know, IP performance. Yeah.
You've talked about lobbying a fair bit. It was one of the first things you talked about right at the start in terms of why the group came into being. I mean, we only find ourselves, we tend to not use the lobbying word. It upsets some of our members. They think that we shouldn't be lobbying. So we campaign with government, we communicate with government, we nudge, we influence, we do all of these things. You might call it lobbying, I might call it lobbying, but lobbying is another dark art. So we're not really allowed to talk about it. We find ourselves needing to do this work occasionally. We're there at the moment in relation to some work around trade. In general terms, how have you found working with and through government? Are there any tips you can share in terms of how to have a relationship with government that means that you are able to influence?
Well, for me, I mean, we've always found, you know, officials, you know, open and hard to influence, actually. And so I think if there was one tip, well, no, actually, I have several tips, I think, that have been very important to us. But the one is, whatever you're asking for, look, you know, what is the consumer dimension? What is the shopper dimension? What is the citizen dimension? Because essentially that trumps everything else. And so, you know, nobody is interested in protecting individual companies, particularly. You know, they are interested in how markets work, but only insofar as the markets are conducive to innovation, better quality products, range of choice, all of those things, sustainable products with reputations, all those things. So that concerns obviously the officials and parliamentarians. So that is the first thing is, put the consumer first and foremost. And if you don't have a strong consumer proposition, then you're probably going to be facing a bit of an uphill battle. And then the second piece for me is the evidence. You've got to come with evidence to say, why what you're asking for is going to be good for the shopper, good for the consumer, good for the citizen, and isn't going to distort, you were talking, Gwilym, about market power, isn't going to unduly create market power or, distort equilibriums in markets, those kind of things. So, so the evidence can be UK, but, comparative evidence from other countries is also really valuable. Yeah. And I'm going to actually quickly, if I may, just have a defense of lobbying, because what lobbying is just portraying your point of view to people who have influence. That's all you're doing. It's down to the people of influence to to agree with you or disagree with you. That that's what it's all about. But if your voice isn't being heard, don't be surprised with what you're given. And it always strikes me as amazing that people think that lobbying is bad, and particularly within your own industry, because if you're going to an MP or an MP is only hearing from other people, perhaps your opponents, but you're not hearing from you because you think lobbying's dirty, well, I think you actually you get what you deserve to an extent.
Again, I'll adopt the Gwilym defense from earlier. Those weren't my words. Those were words that have been said to me.
And actually, I think whether or not SEPA has been lobbying, what SEPA has been doing has been educating from a position of knowledge and very little real. I mean, basically from the point of view, I love your point about focusing on the consumer. In the end, sort of saying, we're lobbying to make sure our IP system's as good as it can be, and the beneficiary of that is going to be the consumer, because a good IP system stimulates innovation, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah.
Can I just again shift the focus a wee bit? I exist in a network of membership association chief execs. I mean, we come together maybe 4 times a year to. There's usually 60, 70 of us, and we have a bit of facilitation, and we just try and sort of test and challenge the work that we're doing and where we might want to go with it next. And I would say up until about probably the start of the pandemic, those were always generally focused on what's important for my association. And I would say in the last 2 years, the things that we've started to look at, what's important for society and how can this association speak to that agenda, which is taking associations out of the kind of the comfort of the immediacy of their own existence and reminding them they operate in a big bad world and there are all sorts of things going on. So the challenge for us at the moment is around sustainability. In the past, it's been around equality, and so how do we respond to these? Do those kinds of pressures, influences, challenges bite on brands as well? I imagine possibly more so in terms of the wider social responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, potentially so. I'm just thinking about, the first part about, as I understood your question, which was really talking about, what drives the association. Because I think, well, certainly I would take the view is that if any member wants to put a particular view, they're always free to do that individually. And that is absolutely their right. But I think, lobbying through the British Brands Group and arguing and, all that through the British Brands Group, you are inherently talking about, a wider good, which is the environment of brands and brands being able to serve citizen shoppers well in the UK. So there's a wider picture there. On sustainability, particularly, that is, a huge issue, occupies, so many waking hours for all our members. It's absolutely, when people talk about, their priorities, you will always see sustainability appearing in probably the top 3, if not the top 2. For many, it'll be the most important one. And, that absolutely, there's no question that penny has dropped across the board. There are lots of organizations who it's a specialist area, and they're much more better equipped to deal with it than we are. So we often find ourselves in a supporting role. So we will put a brand perspective on the sustainability and the fact that Actually, if people, and it comes back to the IP framework too, that, if people invest behind more sustainable products and better performing products, less energy intensive products, and they want to build their reputation on that, they do that through their intellectual property rights, because then that is where that reputation is captured. And that's why we get so upset about parasitic copying, because essentially some people are stealing those efforts. But that's how the IP system should work. And so, we would tend to look at things like sustainability, good purchasing behavior, all of those sort of areas in very much through a brand lens, and bring that dimension to the conversation and the debate.
I love the way, like a good politician, no matter what question I ask, you bring it back to parasitic. Brilliant. Absolutely.
It's just a great example.
It's a masterclass in how having your point and making it repeatedly works. John, we've asked lots of questions of you. Are there any things that you thought, I want to talk about this? Is there stuff we've not talked about that you really wanted to get across?
No, not at all. I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. Thank you both very much indeed. We've touched on some of the thorny issues. We haven't touched on exhaustion of rights, which is always a very topical one, and that is very divisive. Do
you want to quickly run us through that?
Could do. I mean, it is topical at the moment, if you'd like to.
Go for it. I mean, it's a topic that members will be interested in.
So, we've got the current situation where, you've got an imbalance between the UK and the EU. From the UK point of view, we've got free movement of goods, within the UK and the EU. From the EU perspective, that they can stop imports from the UK. From the canvassing that we've done, and actually this podcast is a great platform for me, so I can ask if anybody has any issues with that kind of status quo. I am really keen to hear it, because I'm not hearing it yet, that there are actually really damaging implications coming from that. Politically, really uncomfortable. But actually, practically, I'm not hearing any great cries of anguish over it. Then it comes, so what is going to be the UK policy? And it plays to your question on trade policies. What is the independent UK's view going to be on world trade? Because we all like the idea of free global markets, but actually brand owners really like the idea of being able to tailor their products to the needs of particular consumers, and they unfortunately vary from region to region, and that could be a region within the UK, let alone a region between Western Europe, let alone within Europe, and let alone from the wider world. And so you've got this sort of natural tension that comes into play. And then the reason why it's so relevant at the moment is because of the cost of living crisis. Is that an argument for actually relaxing the rules on exhaustion, so encouraging more parallel trade, so people can buy products in Malaysia or where Indonesia or Latin America or whatever it is, ship it into the UK. If that's going to be a government policy, we just think that is absolutely an area where you need to have really rock solid evidence. Because actually what's driving that is not any price setting by the brand manufacturers. That all tends to be done by local retailers, and actually it tends to be more driven by exchange rates than anything else, in terms of if there are price differences around the world. And would that actually have a price deflationary effect on the market? I don't think so. I just think there were maybe, some price advantages for individual products for short periods of time coming from particular markets. But, I don't think that is it's going to be a little flea bite on the problem of cost of living crisis. I think that's what I would say on parallel trade and exhaustion of rights.
Well, there was the consultation recently, wasn't there? And I think the main consensus was indeed status quo. And there's political issues, aren't there, over getting it perfectly symmetrical to do with the Northern Ireland situation border thing. I don't understand, frankly.
Almost everything comes back to the NI protocol, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It makes life very difficult. Yeah.
It does. But I'd have to say, just a moment of supreme, sounds awful, but a moment of supreme British arrogance was to call the situation of EU plus the UK plus. Just outrageous. Really
and there
is.
You see politics in action.
Genius.
John, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for finding the time to come and share this with us. We'll give you a little shout when the podcasts out, you can sort of let your friends listen. And I normally end with some kind of quirky question, and I've thought of one. I'm going to go to Gwilym. I normally go to the guest first. I'm going to go to Gwilym first, because if I go to you first, John, you're probably going to say I can't answer that question. So let me go to Gwilym.
John. These are exhausting. Go on.
Gwilym, what's your favourite brand?
Oh my Lord, that's an absolutely fantastic one. I don't know. Do you know what? I'll just tell you what jumped into my head, but not because I'm quite peckish, was smoky bacon crisps. Yeah, puffins. I prefer penguin. So what specifically jumped into my head was smoky bacon crisps, which is not a brand, obviously, but Walker's then jumped on the back of that. I don't know why, maybe I'm peckish, but I do have an answer. Oh God, I want smoky bacon crisps. You can't get them now.
I mean, Walker's do a great kind of. There are other crisps, obviously, but Walker's do a great kind of piece of work around brand identity and that, don't they? Just the linking with Lineker and stuff like that. It's fascinating work. So you can ask me in a minute, Gwilym. Let me go to the guest next, if that's okay. John, what's your favourite brand? If it's not going to upset 99% of your members.
Well, I suspect people will be upset already by the things I've been saying on this podcast. So let's go for it. Let's go all guns blazing. And my favorite my brand is not a British brand, and they're not members. But it has to be, for me, Harley Davidson, only because they gave me 9 months of my life that were a blast. And for that, I'm eternally grateful to them. And
we completely failed to ask anything about that, Lee. That's terrible. Really quickly, where'd you go? Just give us a couple of give us a highlight. I'm sorry, I need to know. What was that? Give me one highlight of your Harley Davidson trip.
Highlights of probably brown bears crossing in front of the wheels. That was part of it. Sweat lodges in the wilderness at dead of night, listening to the elk, in the woods. It was just full. Because we got to up to Alaska and then down to Florida. It was amazing, and really privileged to have done it.
And somehow Harley Davidson gets the credit, not America.
Yes, that's right.
Lee, come on.
Well, do you know what? Mine's a similar answer to John's in that sense, in that it's something that it relates to my interest, which is playing squash. I'm a squash addict. I'll play 5-6 times a week, sometimes twice a day, like I did yesterday. And I've only ever used one brand: racket, sweatband, shoes, and that's Prince, American brand. And I've no idea whether it's the best squash racket. I've used other people's rackets, and very often they felt better in the hand and played better. But there is something about, for me, but the Prince racket is the design, it's the powering, it's stuff. There is something about its look and its feel that I can't not buy. So,
I'm feeling like my crisps are a little bit mundane now. Oh, well, I'm sticking by it. I love smoky bacon crisps. I don't care.
John, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you again for coming on. And Gwilym, I will see you on the next one, mate, if that's okay.
Looking forward to it.
Which might well be in a pub.
Yes.
Thank you both very much. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
Cheers.